Hello, how is everyone doing? It is your fallen angel back with another video. Today, we are covering the concept of the triune brain. But before we get started, feel free to check us out on Rumble, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, things of that nature. Also, like and subscribe. But without further ado, guys, let us just jump right in. So guys, when we think of the triune brain, we just want to take the prefix tri, and we know that the prefix tri is 3. The un means 1, so this means the tri and the un becomes the unison of the 3 parts of the brain becoming 1. So, the reason human behavior is so strange is that we have not 1 but 3 brains. The 3 brains are incompatible, and although they try to work together, they often fail. Now, you're going to say, what does that mean? How is it possible that the human brain is failing? That is because certain parts of the triune brain overpower, such as emotions. The limbic brain often overpowers the neocortex computer brain. This is why people act out on emotion, right? We don't see people acting out on logic. We see people acting out on desire, emotion, and things of that nature. So, the triune brain is the hypothesis of neurologist Paul MacLean, and he proposes that evolution has adopted a policy of building more advanced brains on top of older, more primitive brains, rather than redesigning from scratch. So, Paul MacLean is the neurologist, the MD, the psychiatrist that understands the triune brain and how this intertwines with our society and how many of the actions that people are doing, many of the thought patterns, the actions stem exactly from this triune brain. So, we have the chance to be brain archaeologists and to dig down into our evolutionary past. We can discover that there was a time when we were far from human and much more like crocodiles. MacLean says of the 3 brains that they operate like 3 interconnected biological computers, each with its own special intelligence, its own subjectivity, its own sense of time and space, and its own memory. So, we see the limbic controls the emotions, the neocortex, the higher thinking, the reptile or primitive for survival and aggression. So we have to understand how all 3 parts of the brain intertwine. But we also mentioned at the beginning that they necessarily do not all work together. So one of them may overpower the other, depending on how you control your brain, depending on how you think, depending on your thoughts, your external stimuli, and that of nature. So, brain number 1, the lowest and earliest brain, is the reptilian brain, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. Brain number 2, the secondary evolutionary stratum, is the ancient mammalian brain, the limbic system. Brain number 3, the human layer, is the neo-mammalian brain, the neocortex. Although all of the brains are interconnected by nerves, hence can communicate with each other, they often seem to operate autonomously as separate brain systems with their own distinctive capacities. So guys, even though we know that triune ends up being 1, and that these are all interconnected, depending on the individual, one will overpower the other, okay? One will end up overpowering the other because some individuals do not know this system. Some individuals do not know why they're thinking certain thoughts. They don't understand desire. They don't understand certain capacities of their own brain. But that is okay. They can always learn. But some people refuse to learn. That is the difference. In colloquial terms, a human being is like a crocodile, a reptilian brainstem, a horse limbic system, and a computer neocortex all lashed together, with almost comical consequences in many cases. Or should that be tragic? The crocodile part of us deals with the basic survival, instinctive, and reproductive functions, the 4 F's: feeding, fucking, fight, or flight. This is the new level to which men typically sink after a few drinks. So, this level is the most primitive of primitive crocodile brains. This is the ideology that survival, reproduction, the 4 F's: feeding, sex, fight, or flight. That's all it comes down to. And many of the men in our society are operating at this level, at this base level. This is just the base level, right? That's all that crocodiles do with their tiny pea-sized brains. They fight and feed, they flee if necessary, they reproduce. Otherwise, they're just waiting and watching. Paul MacLean wrote, "It is very difficult to imagine a lonelier and more emotionally empty being than a crocodile." Yep, sounds like a lot of men. The horse, or the limbic brain, part deals with the higher F, the capital F, or feelings. This is the level women typically operate at. So now we understand that there are subsections to the brain, and somehow these subsections to the triune brain dominate each other. So there's been a theory that if you try to ask a woman a straight question, you won't get a straightforward answer because the limbic system or the feelings of the horse part brain is taking over. The computer part is where our reason resides. This is the level of philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians. Nietzsche, Socrates, Pythagoras. In terms of characters from the original Star Trek, we might say that the most primitive part of our brain is our inner Captain Kirk, the emotional part our Dr. McCoy, and the computer part our inner Mr. Spock. So guys, if you ever watched Star Trek, you understand these people's temperament. We understand how they act and how they are moving based on their brain. Mr. Spock is extremely intelligent, but he is operating on this higher neocortex, while Captain Kirk is our primitive reptile brain, where it's pretty basic, it's pretty basic. It's just, today's another day, let's reproduce, let's have fun. It's pretty basic. And then Dr. McCoy is our emotional part, this is the feeling of things. This is the emotion that comes with it, rather than logic. This is also intertwined with left and right hemisphere brain ideology. In Freudian terms, the id corresponds to the crocodile brain, the ego to the horse brain, and the superego to the computer brain or the neocortex. Most men don't get beyond the id or the crocodile level of existence. They are knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who spend the years watching every sequel of Fast and Furious, sports fanatics, and mindless idol worship. So guys, this quote, "Give them bread and circuses and they will never revolt." This is relevant in history throughout history, right? If you give the masses something to just watch and just appease their basic 4Fs, the feeding, the sex, the fight or flight, then they will be satisfied. This is why violence is glorified. Think about all the violence that we see, that people get paid millions and millions and millions of dollars for violence. Floyd Mayweather gets paid 50 million, almost 100 million, just for a 20-minute fight. And the doctors that are doing surgeries to save your family's lives are getting paid in less than $1 million. So we see this Neanderthal behavior being glorified in society, right? This is glorified. This is why many of the men in this society are on this id crocodile level existence. Few of humanity rise to the world of reason and consciousness powered by the logical circuits of the computer brain. This highest arena is uniquely human. No other animals have an onboard computer, and the irony is that few humans know how to operate it. Luckily for you, on this channel, not only do we help you train your brain to make new thought patterns, to make new grooves, we teach you trance levels. We teach you how to put yourself in a trance level, how to rewire your brain, how to enter your right hemisphere brain, how to really dive deep and become a spiritual entity and a conscious entity and a man of reason or a woman of reason, whichever it may be. There are whiz kids at using iPhones, but they are clueless about using their own brains properly. So we all know a plethora of people who knows the ins and outs of their cell phones, or the ins and outs of a device, or the ins and outs of sports and things of that nature, but they don't have the ins and outs of their brain, right? They don't know how to control their thoughts and emotions. They don't know how to decipher this, right? They cannot use this neocortex to their advantage. They remain in this reptile brain or the limbic brain for most of their thought process. This holds them back. Because as light beings, our thoughts and emotions is what's going to manifest in the physical plane. They mostly use brains 1 and 2, the reptile and horse brain, and rarely trouble brain 3. It lies dormant and dusty in most people, like some never visited library containing all the knowledge of the cosmos. In fact, many men struggle to use anything more than the crocodile brain. Their minds are preoccupied with fucking, fighting, and feasting, almost like the Vikings. Now, while this isn't a bad thing, this isn't the greatest thing either, right? Many men are swayed by this lust. Now, in a previous video on semen retention, feel free to check that out as well, I explained that as a man, your greatest tool is your tool of discernment. Your second greatest tool is your sexual desire. And your ability to transmute this sexual desire is what you will be able to put in this cosmos. Pointlessly having sex or pointlessly wasting your energy is nothing more than your crocodile brain in full effect, right? You have to be able to open this third part of the brain. This is how you become more spiritually inclined. This is how you would understand why the Kabbalah helps you understand the supernatural and why you're here. You have to step away from this physical desire and enter the supernatural understanding. So for many people, the neocortex, the third part of the brain, ends up dormant. It never is opened up. Even for women, they do not operate at the crocodile level, the bottom tier that men do, even though some may. To some degree, that we all think about reproduction and survival, they are operating at the more emotional level, the horse level, right? The limbic system level. The computer brain, sadly, does not dominate the lower brains. Sadly, it does not. It has to be opened up by yourself and by true dedication, true understanding, and true removal of the ego. So, the limbic system, the seat of emotions, usually hijacks the higher mental functions. Reason is put to the service of the emotions, rather than the emotions being in the service of the reason. This is why we see so many people acting out in spurts of emotion, in spurts of estrogenic responses, in spurts of just, this was not logical at all, but they did it because it felt good. The emotion felt good. This is the limbic system rewarding this behavior. They would rather follow emotion, even though the emotion may be completely wrong, but in the moment, if it felt correct, that is what they would go with. This is also an animalistic desire. This is why we call it the horse brain, because it's still part of the limbic brain, right? In times of great stress or sexual excitement, the crocodile takes charge of everything, and humans become reptiles operating at a very basic instinctive level. So, what we must recognize is both of these, limbic and reptile brain, takes over. It is more dominant than the computer brain. The computer brain has to be activated by dedication, like we said. This has to be activated by compromise. This has to be activated by the loss of ego. This has to be compromised. This has to be activated by using your thoughts and truly understanding nuance to a high degree. This is what intrinsically explains higher levels of IQ, by using reasoning and not living off these basic desires, these basic instinctive level of reptile thinking, or the pea-sized brain of a reptile or crocodile. With this model of brain, it becomes easy to see why humanity struggles to reach its peak, its potential. Most people are stuck at the level of crocodile or horse, and cannot raise themselves to the godlike rational level of the internal supercomputer that we have in our brain. The attachment of gnosis requires the highest brain working at full capacity. So if you want to awaken your third eye, if you want to be at your peak, mentally, physically, spiritually, you have to activate this godlike, rational, internal supercomputer that is within all of us. But it is the fact that people remain at this part of the brain, this little part here, the inside part, this reptilian brain. The middle brain acts as the limbic system, and then the exterior here. This is the supercomputer that we have. This supercomputer of energy can circuit whatever we want on this cosmos. We are light beings, and the aura we're emitting is directly based on our thoughts and emotions. So, when these two are dominating, It is very hard to be at this level. So guys, in Jungian terms, the shadow is the crocodile brain. The ego, persona, and animus are the limbic system. And the self is the computer. Reason, not belief, makes us God-like. Our ability to use reason, our ability to decipher propaganda, in fact, our ability for discernment, reason is what makes us almost God-like. Our belief in something else removes this external understanding of who we are, because we have to understand the kingdom of heaven lies within. If you are to believe something else, you are losing the belief in yourself. What has to be understood is, in the Jungian terms, the shadow for the crocodile is just the exterior. The ego, persona for the animus, and the limbic system are just ego. But to truly understand the system, the self, as the computer, is to understand reason. It's to understand more intuitively who we are as individuals, not the ego. We are not the ego. So guys, this was a short video on the triune brain and how it intertwines with society and what the triune brain really is. Later, we will be going into much more depth on the triune brain, the limbic system, and how society tries to embed their values on us, and how they try to keep us at a very, very animalistic reptile brain, an animalistic horse-like brain. They do not want us using this neocortex, because if everyone was operating off this neocortex, we would be functioning at a much higher rate. We would be using much more percentile of our brain. We would not need to be governed by any entity. That is why they need to keep us at a much lower state, a lower vibrational output. So guys, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. I'd love to read them. Also, check us out on Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, things of that nature. Also, Rumble. And this is your fallen angel, and I am out.